All right, and we are live. Thank you to everyone who is joining us in the comments and everybody who's watching the replay. First of all, hi, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today I'm very excited to get a chance to chat with these two wonderful fantasy authors, Thiago Abdalla, who is the author of the Ashes of Avrin series and SPFBO 8 finalist. And we are joined today by the one and only Mark Lawrence, who has published over 15 books in the fantasy genre. And I mean, he's a household name at this point in our community, so I'll let him introduce himself. Mark, would you like to say hello or introduce yourself for anyone who doesn't know who you are? The one person.
Household name, so I don't need to, do I? No. I'm a fantasy author, and you should all read my books. I think I'll leave it at that.
That's a good one. Thiago?
I'm Thiago. If you watch Tori's channel, you've probably seen me on before, but I'm the author of The Ashes of Avrin, which includes the 3 books that are behind Mark right now: Prelude to Ashes, Touch of Light, and Shade of Madness. Yeah.
I wondered if you'd spot those.
Yeah, definitely. I always have Mark Lawrence's books here behind me. My Touch of Light is usually here, but I'm currently reading the book The Wouldn't Burn, so it's there with the bookmark popping out. So, well, I have my 2 favorite Mark Lawrence trilogies here as well.
Nice.
Authors' eyes become very attuned to picking out their own covers in a crowd.
Yeah,
that's true. Well, yeah, I mean, the first thing I wanted to do was say congratulations, Mark, for the new book release, Book That Wouldn't Burn. That came out pretty recently here, and I've been seeing amazing feedback from the people in the community that have been reading through it already. So congratulations on that. And also congratulations to Thiago for SPFBO 8 finalists. That wrapped up recently as well. So there's been a lot going on for everybody this last couple of weeks. I wanted to start with kind of what I kind of consider an icebreaker question, and that's, as writers, we can write in any genre. So for both of you, why fantasy? What drew you to fantasy specifically?
My answer is simple. It's Magic the Gathering, I think. It started out with Age of Empires, and that just led me to Magic eventually, and I was all into fantasy from there. So yeah, it just kind of took over my life, and I realized I really liked it and couldn't let go.
I think you've got to write what you like, and I've always been a fan of fantasy. My mother read me Lord of the Rings at a very early age, and I got into D&D very early on. So fantasy is my first love, but I have written sci-fi as well, and even a thriller, so can write other stuff.
Yeah, dabble in whatever tickles your fancy at the time. So for those who maybe aren't as familiar, Mark, with your books, and this is something that I wanted to put in because I know I have several people in the comments that were very excited to hear you talk and have not had the chance to read one of your series yet. Where do you recommend people start?
Well, if you were to Google the phrase "Guide to Lawrence," you might see stuff about Lawrence of Olivier up there, but also Lawrence of Arabia or Lawrence Olivier there. But you'll probably find a helpful page that is a guide to my stuff because it's very varied. And so it really is more a question of what you like rather than this is the best or this is the start. I think I've shot myself in both feet really by refusing to stay in a lane. And so I make each trilogy rather different in style and content to the previous one. And so people who came to trilogy number 2 expecting sort of the grimdark of the first one were disappointed. But people who had heard the first one was grimdark didn't try trilogy number 2 because they thought that would be grimdark too. And 16 books later, I'm still called the grimdark author Mark Lawrence, even though it was only the first trilogy of 16 books that was dark. So yes, you could look at that and you could say, well, do I want something, a sort of a sci-fi set in 80s London around the D&D group, or do I want something that's set in a convent and is more about friendship, or do I want something that's blood and guts and a very dark view of the world and dive into Prince of Thorns?
Yeah.
I really like this one as kind of an introduction to the writing. And, if you want to go grimdark from there, but, Prince of Thorns is also really, it's a really good hook, in my opinion. I was really hooked to your writing with Prince of Thorns because of the way that it's written. So, yeah, I agree. It's varied, but I think there is a through line in your work, which is just the themes and how deep it goes, even if everything around it changes, which kind of like feels very comfortable once you get into it. So yeah, I know tastes vary, but I think there's a certain kind of threshold that you're always over. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think I try and I certainly have a theme of memory that goes through a lot of my stuff. And I guess I kind of aim at the slightly more intellectual end of the spectrum, but it's still lots of blood and guts and things exploding and fun and jokes and whatnot. So, yeah. And I always try to pay attention to the writing, not just the story. So I like it to be well written line by line. And a lot of people appreciate the prose, I guess.
Yeah, I would
Honestly,
agree. I was going to
the Boredom
say,
Burn is a good one as well, because it's not it's like standalone. It's a standalone trilogy in a sense, because it's
I think
not
it's
necessarily
that's a very accessible one, just because I mean, all of the rest, apart from Impossible Times, have a level of violence that would, even though it's not grimdark, would be a barrier to some people. Whereas I think even people who like cozy fantasy could enjoy the book that wouldn't burn.
Yeah,
I completely agree with the comments talking about Red Sister. That was the first trilogy, Mark, of yours that I read, and really, that was a great entrance point too, because like Thiago said, I think it's a very accessible trilogy, and it has a lot of themes that are relatable to a lot of people, and it's good. It's really good writing, so you kind of get a little bit of everything, and I think it's a good branch out point too.
It has a lot more of a cast to it. I think the first two trilogies were really, in Prince of Thorns, entirely focused on the lead character, and in the Red Queen's War trilogy, it was mainly focused on the two main characters. And there was a supporting cast, but I think in Red Sister it really does spread out, so it becomes more about a team effort, and you spend more time with even sort of fairly minor characters come to life here and there.
Yeah. And so, Thiago, because you have a prequel novella, we always get the question, when there's a prequel novella, do you start with A Touch of Light or do you start with Prelude to Ashes?
it depends if you want to play it on hard mode or not. No, honestly, I mean, the prequel novella is smaller, more contained. So some people have said it's easier to get into the series if you start with the prequel novella, because you already, have an introduction to the world and all that. But at the same time, there are people who read it after Touch of Light and said they got more out of it because they already knew the characters, so they were more emotionally attached. So the prequel novella brought them more. So it honestly depends.
Did you write it after having seen the reaction of readers to the first book, or had you already written it by the time people were reading the first book?
I wrote it after having seen the reactions, but not because of the reactions. I wrote it as just a way to have a free introduction to my writing, basically. And that's maybe a reason why it's more accessible as well. But to be honest, it wasn't necessarily, oh no, people are saying they get confused by the size of my world, so I'm going to write something simpler. It's more of a, okay, this is just a more contained world. I'd say the writing style is still the same, because I don't want to give something that's really, different from the rest of the series, so that, okay, people hop on and then they get something completely different. It's like a 180. So I was very,
I mean, you're right that the touch of light does kind of throw you in the deep end, and there's a quite a steep learning curve to it, which you're saying the prequel can flatten out a bit. But for me, and I liked the touch of light a lot, but I did get confused in places, and it wasn't the size of the world that I was confused about. It was the nature of the magic or mental state of the two of the three main characters that I was a bit at sea understanding what the character was able to do and why exactly. There was so quite a complex structure involving emotional state that there was certainly no sort of hand holding there, but that can work really well because when you start like that, it can feel much more real. If you ever try and introduce things, they can often feel like the author is telling you this, and if the author is telling you this and explaining this for your benefit, then it takes you out of the story and creates distance. So it's a balancing game.
Exactly, and as a reader, and that's exactly the point. I don't change the style in the prequel novella and start explaining things. It's the same style. It's just less names, a little more straightforward plot, so it's less things to keep in your mind, so it's maybe easier to follow along. But yeah, that you explained is, I think Philip hits it on the head with his comments. It's the reader's confusion basically matches the character's confusion, and it's exactly my way of putting you into the character's skin.
Of course, a lot of authors get around this by throwing their character into a school, and then you get educated and it's not the author doing it, it's the teachers doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Or just having a dumb companion who needs everything explained to them.
Yeah. But even then, I mean, as a reader, to me, it always sticks out. Maybe it's just personal, but every time, if the author isn't really, really tactful with how they do it, every time it just sticks out. It's like, oh, but why does this happen? It's like, oh, okay, here we go, here it comes. So
everyone has their own level. There's some mechanics in the book that wouldn't burn that are, well, my editor thought they were quite complicated and said, could you explain this again another time you're in a different place, so that we don't have readers who read through it and are just lost. And that's a valid concern, because you can just not be paying enough attention the first time around, or you could just be so an alien a concept to you that it doesn't really gel with you. And I did, but then you get people who go, oh my god, he's repeated this whole thing again, and because they got it the first time and they've got no time for having it laid out again, they feel that's tiresome. So you can't please all the people all the time.
Yeah, and I totally agree. It's a balance. It's something that you learn as you go on, I guess. And even with the style that I chose to write it in, I think it's a lot more accessible in books 2 and 3 that I'm writing right now, because I learned how to reach that balance a little bit more without having to info dump, basically. So yeah, I think it evolves as we grow as authors.
Yeah. Well, that's a question I would throw out then, if you're looking at, the kind of show don't tell kind of mindset, what, as fantasy authors, when we're introducing a completely new world with all the, usually a magic system and a completely new set of politics and everything, how do you guys approach getting that information to the reader without the big info dumps? Like where do you kind of approach putting it into the story?
You can start with this one while I think a bit.
I always tend to have my character learn alongside the reader. So even if they're not being taught formally, they will be coming from a place of ignorance and discovering it as they go along. And yes, if you want to write a fully formed, complex world with characters who are embedded in it and fully aware of all of the complexities, then it's difficult, because unless you choose a sort of country bumpkin who comes in and needs it all explained to them for the reader's benefit. You're left with info dumping, and frankly, I'd rather be confused than have info dumping. That really does annoy me. But yeah, I'm reading Sons of Darkness at the moment, and that's it's got a sort of fully fledged complex society with loads of moving parts, and the author's not really explaining it to you. He's throwing you in and just letting you see it at work, but it's sufficiently interestingly written and well written that it's enjoyable. And even if I don't really know how the politics, because there's all these factions and stuff, but I'm prepared to say, yeah, there's loads of factions and they're doing complicated things, but I'm interested in this guy and the trouble he's in, and all the rest of it is a sort of nice background that just makes me feel it's a real world. Tori appears to have frozen.
Oh yeah. Frozen
very contemplative.
Yeah.
Looks like she's really paying attention and considering our words.
Yeah.
So anyway, you were going to give your answer.
Yeah. To me, it's kind of like a game of how much can you do of exposition without the reader noticing, and how, can you kind of hide it in a way that's engaging, right? So Tori just sent me a message saying keep going. She's probably coming back in a while. So if you manage to frame the exposition as something like opposition, I think that's a really, really good way of going about it. So for example, if you have someone who wants something and another person doesn't want them to have that, for example, and if they start an argument, and instead of I'm explaining to you why you can't have this, in the argument you start to show little bits and pieces and explain what you mean, the reader is kind of engaged a lot more with the argument or with the opposition, with the tension, that they they kind of breeze over the exposition. And if you make it small enough and just feed it to the reader in small enough pieces, I think that's a really natural way of going about it. So
that's very good.
Yeah, I really like trying to find these kind of different ways and just breaking exposition into them and sliding them in without anyone noticing. So that's how I try to do it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, we're taught not to put in lots of exposition and info dumps, and that's entirely valid. But some people do it, and some people do it in such an engaging way. Like the thing that they're talking about is fascinating, and they're talking about it in a really interesting, entertaining way that you can swallow it, and it works. And I think, what's his name? Dirk Ashton.
The Patronus.
His book he breaks all the rules. His book is full of exposition and info dumping, and yet I was happy because it was really entertaining. But if someone has just an arbitrary made up politics and cities and whatnot, and they want to tell me about it at great length, no, it's so boring that you have to make me care about it first, or simultaneously, and it's incredibly hard to do simultaneously. But George R.R. Martin tends to be able to do that, and Dirk as well to it in his thing. But generally speaking, you can't. It's just like you're telling me about your dreams. I'm not interested. I don't care if the city of blah blah is by a river so and so, and King Ippy is against King Affy. It doesn't matter. You've got to give me some stake in it, and then. But if you're just a fascinating raconteur, you can probably get away with it.
I think, to me at least, the secret is making it matter to the characters, because that's how the reader's connecting to the story. So if world building matters to the characters, then it's going to matter to the reader, right? And it's just a question of where you slip it in. It can even be an info dump, kind of, not all the time, but if it's a very important info dump for the characters, I feel readers actually accept that a little bit better. So yeah, and I think
the info dump thing is advice rather than a rule. So
yeah. And also framing it as like mythology, when the mythology is important, I think that works really well. And I think that's something you do in the Book of the Ice that I absolutely love. All of the stories with Mocha and
Zin.
I forgot Zin, exactly. Yeah, Mocha and Zin, and they're always like they always mean something to Yaz, and they're always important for that moment. It's not like, let's all sit around the fire and just explain all of our history through our mythology. It's not, I mean, that's not a good way of framing it. It's more like the character remembering the mythology that was taught to her when it matters makes it matter to the story at that time. So you get to do exposition, because exposition is a necessary part of writing. It's not like bad or a sin or anything. It's just that it's super easy for people to do it, so people do it too much.
So it's like
But
salt.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
be conscious of how much you're putting in.
yeah.
Yeah. So for you guys, when you first start, where do the first sparks of a story idea come from? Like where's the very first moment that the story begins for each of you as writers? Mark?
Oh, okay. It's always tends to be. It is generally character for me that I think of someone I want to tell you about, that I want to explore, and after that there'll be a sort of what's the immediate situation, what's the world, and just start typing and go with it. But yeah, I mean, most of my characters have a fairly clear issue, and so wouldn't it be fun to write someone who just doesn't give a shit, and if someone gets in his way, is just going to murder the hell out of them? Yes, it would. So and go for, and for Jorg and Jalan, there were very clear inspiration as well. I said basically I want to write a character that's like Alex from the Clockwork Orange, or like Flashman from the Flashman novels. And with Nona, it was just I wanted to write someone who was who didn't fully grasp that sort of intuitive language that most people have, where they understand where everyone else is coming from and how social interactions work. And I know that a lot of people feel a sort of step behind or a step outside that sort of, you have the people who are easy in their skins and sort of just the world works for them, and then the rest of us are just slightly outside that tent looking in saying, how's that going? And Nona was even a step further back, and really struggling with those, and then those ideas of how you make friends and what friendship is, and because it was such a puzzle to her, it also became much more important to her. So I wanted to write a character like that, and then put her in an interesting world where she would be challenged.
Nona is just, I love how her core values override anything. Like obviously no spoilers, but the end of Red Sister is just spectacular to me. How faithful to herself she is, and that's what makes her one of my favorite fantasy protagonists of all time. It's really, really cool, and that makes sense that you start with the character and what they are. So yeah, them being faithful to that like core value of friendship, for example, is really cool. To me, I kind of start with theme before I'm gonna write, but the idea itself usually just sparks from something that I read or see or like. So, or something that, an idea I'd like to talk about, basically. And sometimes you can watch a movie or read a book and say, this is a cool idea. This is something maybe I might have something to say about this that's different from what I'm reading in this book. So I'll think of something and make it up. And just a second. This. Okay. So yeah, that's basically how I go about it, and then I add theme and start building it up. And the characters to me are the bridge to translate all of that's in my head to the reader, right? So then I use the characters to bridge all of that. And how do we want to look at these issues or at these things that I'm building? And this character might look at it one way, this character might look at it another way, and then that's how I start to get my main characters and build them.
I want to see more of what's going on in the background.
I know. we are a
Cute
very
kids, much more
my
interesting
son
than
came,
books.
my son came to show me that he had a carrot, and my wife pulled him away, and then he started crying because he wanted to show me his carrot. So I'm just gonna pull him in here.
Anita's chewing you out. Yeah, we are a very kid-friendly channel over here, so
I'm more likely to be interrupted by a large cat, but yeah.
You know, I don't think anybody would be upset about seeing Wobble. So
Not as cute as Thiago's son there.
Yeah. So Mark, I'm curious because you play with a lot of protagonists who very much drift away from the traditional hero kind of protagonist. And I think that that's really, I always find them very interesting. And obviously there's been such a huge explosion of, you know, the shades of gray in between black and white in fantasy. And I think that's really cool. So when you're writing a protagonist, what makes them endearing despite their, or not endearing, but engaging to the reader, despite the fact that someone like Jorg, like how do you write a character? What are you hoping the reader is getting from a character like him?
I mean, first off, the idea of not writing your traditional hero, it's because the traditional sort of character is very bland and generic, and they're really just a vehicle for exploring a world. So if you're all about world building and armies and big bat, then just have your bland standard guy out of the kit and have him rush to the castle, and it's fine. You know, I've enjoyed stuff like that, but it's then about the world and what's happening. It's about the plot.
Yeah.
And I'll have people who read some of my books and they'll say, I read 100 pages and nothing happened. And that's because like this character may be going through like complete upheavals, but because the plot didn't change, they think nothing happened. For me, the character is the story.
Yeah.
So I like to pick interesting characters, and the world is there really to exercise them, to sort of put pressure on different parts of their personality and make things happen, you know, to either have someone who, you know, like Thiago was saying, has these core values that they hold to very strongly. Well, let's make the world challenge that and see quite how strongly they hold to them. So yeah, I'm interested in character, and so I choose lots of different types of characters. And I think the secret that I was intrigued by in Prince of Thorns, which is why I wrote it, was simply I asked myself, I'd noticed that if you write in first person, that the person reading the book or watching the TV, if it's a sort of point of view type TV, is much more tolerant of bad behavior by whoever's doing it, you know. So if you watch someone murder someone and dispose of the corpse from the outside, you go, oh, I hope they get caught. Whereas if you are inside that person and they've got the body in the boot of their car and they've pushed it into the lake and all of a sudden it's not sinking, you're going, oh my God, sink, because you're sort of bonded with that person and you want them to succeed, whatever they're doing. It's like being on a team that in politics, if your guy, whoever it might be, your candidate for president, does something horrific, a lot of people will just go, yeah, but he's my guy, so I'll just make up excuses for why he can do a horrific thing. I don't want the other side to win. And it's this writing in the first person, writing a tight point of view, will bond you to that character, and you'll be on team that character, and you will put up with an awful lot of. And so with Jorg, I was just saying, I wonder if I make him do this terrible thing, will everyone abandon him? Because I was writing these chapters, I started writing a short story and then I turned longer, so I started writing chapters. But I was putting them chapter by chapter on a writing group, a Yahoo group, with, you know, sort of a few dozen people on it. And I was just going, you know, what do I have to do to make these people stop reading? You know, at what point will they go, I'm not reading about this guy, he's horrific, what are you doing? And it turned out there was no point, which I could reach, at least at which I wanted to go to. Well, I was sort of, that's another thing that people sometimes say, oh, this wasn't dark enough for me, as if I had somehow failed to make something. And that always makes me laugh, because I could go 10 times darker. I just don't want to. And the idea that there are people out there whose imaginations can't plumb those depths, I'm kind of jealous of them, because some of the nasty stuff that bubbles up, I don't want it to bubble up. I'm certainly not going to spend time wallowing in it and putting it on the page. So for me, Jorg's activities were fairly, they were dark, but they weren't sort of, if you read a horror novel, sort of lots of crime novels about serial killers, they'll describe what they do, and it's much, much worse than what Jorg does. His worst moment is much lighter than their best day. It's just expectation that people didn't expect it to turn up in a fantasy novel.
Right.
It's not that this stuff doesn't exist. So yeah, that's my answer. I like to explore a variety of characters, and Jorg's Extremes were really just an experiment. I didn't expect the book to be published in how much a first-person point of view binds your sympathy to that first-person character, how much leeway it gives you. And then, as the books progressed, I wanted to make him a deeper, more rounded character, not just a sort of Joffrey, but to sort of put some depth there and make him into a question, so that he was a very dark grey, at least, that he was young. So there's the issue of how young do you need to be before your crimes don't stick with you for the entire rest of your life. And he was a product of particular grim circumstances. And again, there's a question, how much do those circumstances ameliorate our view of his crimes? If he'd just come out of the first world and a lovely life and done those things, we'd be more against him. But how much more? So he's a question, and I wasn't expecting a reader to fall on one side or the other. I wasn't expecting a reader to say, I'm 100% Team Jorg, or that I absolutely have no time for this at all. I was just posing a question to them and saying, what do you think?
Yeah. And I think that what you said about first person is really interesting as well, because you really get into Jorg's mind. And I think maybe that's what causes the shock at times. Like you said, you're really in the character, and yeah, people didn't expect that. But I totally agree that I was all pro Jorg. I was cheering for him. I was like, yeah, I want you to kill that guy. So I don't know what that says about me, but
So there's different lenses to view it through, because you can. It depends on the mindset you come to it. If you come to it from a sort of, I don't know, you've just been watching the news and you say you've seen horrible things, and you say, I'm going to think about the horrible things he's doing in terms of real people. That's one level. But you may have just come to it from a video game where you're just mowing people down and just approach it in that, it's in the same style that, oh, that was a good headshot. It's not like you're thinking about that person's life and his family and all of that. It's, you can take a point of view in a game that was a good headshot. And there's lots of people out there who are not monsters, who can, when playing a game like that, go, hey, look at the blood splatter. And you can enjoy the book on that level as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel there are other levels to consider it on.
Definitely. Sorry, Tori, I was wrangling the kids here. I didn't hear the question.
We were just talking about kind of the exploration of morally gray or anti-hero, or insert label here, characters, and how you approach engaging with the reader with kind of that non-traditional hero style protagonist.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark covered it pretty well. I just say, on my side, I just try to be like what would a person do in real life? You know, and people aren't 100% evil or 100% good in real life. So yeah, they'll probably be selfish, but and then it comes down to the character's values. Like would they sacrifice what they want for a greater good, for example, or would they do this differently? But it's not like I think the speed that they decide stuff is what makes it different to me. You know, it's like sure, yeah, morally great characters might do the right thing, but they might not do the right thing for everyone. It's the right thing for them, or they might take a while to decide that they want to do the right thing, right? I think that's kind of like what we do in real life, right? It's just like the speed in which they make the decisions is important, right? The time that the thought takes to really take hold and okay, so yeah, I'm gonna do this.
Mm-hmm.
And usually bad stuff is a lot more like spur of the moment, like something that oh okay, I'm really angry, so I killed this guy, right? It's not thought out. So yeah, I think it's just kind of a reflection of real life.
I think it's nice if you can write either from book to book or within a selection of your point of view characters in a book, characters who, if you face them with a number of similar situations, will make different decisions and will have good reasons for doing that, and that the reader will expect them to have, you know, having read for a bit, will sort of say, "Oh yes, this fits with Jim. He would do this."
Yeah.
But if they're all, you know, just fairly nice people trying to do the right thing, then they're all going to make similar decisions, and it gets a bit samey. You know, you just got name tags rather than characters.
I did that in Official Light, to be honest. A little bit because I'm cheeky, but a little bit because I wanted to explore that, you know, and like the situations that are presented at their core are the same for two of the POV characters. They're kind of like mirrors, and they just act differently with what's presented to them. So and shows kind of like the different paths that they're taking, and that keeps going throughout the series. So yeah.
John has a question too for Mark. Could you tell us about how you developed Yaz, then a more traditional hero?
Well, she, as John says, she is a more traditional hero, and I think she's the first one that I would say is could be described as, you know, wearing the traditional hero hat, and partly it's because I had written all these characters who weren't. That it would, I felt, what can I do to avoid writing the same character again? I can write someone who is, but in her case, I guess in my way of thinking it, I made her interesting to me by having her not be a warrior in any sense. So she's very strong. She's got very brave, got great endurance, but she's no good at fighting, not interested in fighting, and she overcomes her challenges in other ways. So she's got the soul of a hero, but not the armor and the sword that one would traditionally expect. And a lot of her struggle is just against the environment rather than anyone a baddie per se, though she does also have conflicts with people you can call baddies.
Yeah. So kind of going along the line of character, when you guys are looking at the story and building that character, what do you feel makes the character the right person to tell the story? Like, how do you decide out of a cast of characters, this is the only one that's going to tell the story, or these are the, you know, the group of characters that are going to tell the story? Thiago, you've got 4 now.
I take kind of the opposite approach. I don't build a cast and then pick out the character. I go the opposite way. I'm like, okay, so I need a character to look at the world like this because this is what I want them to see, and this is what I want to tell through this character's eyes, right? And then there's something called four corner opposition, which we've discussed, and Alan has called it a math kind of like I don't even remember what he called it. He said it looked like math, but it's kind of like a graph where you have the protagonist and what they believe in, and then you have the antagonist who believes the opposite thing, and then you have these other characters in the other two corners, which are, it's positive and negative, and then what they believe and what they don't believe. So it kind of, each character is there to pull the protagonist either towards like the good side of what they believe in, the bad side of what they believe in, or the good side of the opposite of what they believe in. There's merit in that as well, or the bad side of what they don't believe in, right? And that's where you place usually the antagonist or and side characters. But it's called four corner opposition, but I just looked at it as a graph where you can plot any number of characters. So I just keep plotting characters there as I need to, but they're always connected to the character's core belief, and the character doesn't need to have one core belief. So you can either start branching that out, it becomes kind of 3D at that point, or you can just do like 2 or 3 graphs. And it can get as complex as you want it to. It doesn't need to be super complex, but I usually go for like one main core belief and a few other beliefs that are secondary, I'd call them, and then I kind of use the characters to pull the main character in those directions. But all of this is connected to the main reason of why I built the character in the first place, which is the way that they are going to see the world, or the question that I'm posing throughout the entire series. And then, will they change their way of seeing it? Will they explore another way and then come back to the way that they used to see it? Or, how far can they stretch, basically? So yeah, that's how I do it. I don't necessarily create the entire cast like from the get-go. I start populating this kind of graph as I need it.
So that sounds terribly scientific. Do you actually have, so you're telling me you actually have drawn out these graphs? You could reach out and grab a piece of paper or a file and show us these graphs, could you?
Yeah. I mean, they're pretty rough, and I need to kind of look for them, to be honest, because I wrote them by hand. But yeah, I can find them. And,
Wow, well, I'm impressed.
I could actually do something that's presentable. Grab my rough drafts and build something presentable and then show them to you. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's I'm color me impressed. I just make shit up as I go along. I would say that I literally, I don't keep any notes about what my character believes, or I'm not saying that I'm not trying to belittle that in any way.
No, of course,
because everyone has different ways, and you would think as a scientist that I would be coming at it from a more scientific point of view. But I guess this is like my holiday from all of that, so I don't. But to address the original question, I it's not so much that I would pick a character or pick a character from a collection of characters to face a particular challenge or the world. It is that I would literally shape the world and the challenge to be interesting for the character. If I had, like I was describing, the character Nona, Nona, who had these various issues with social interactions, and so I put her in the middle of a community where there would be lots of social interactions, and then I put the people she had befriended in danger so that we would see what she would do about it and how far she would be prepared. And I had some of them be nasty to her or betray her, so we'd see again what her limits were on that sort of thing. It's really a question of, for me, making the world dance so that we get interesting aspects. Because if I'd said, I've got it, I want to write about this character Nona who has these issues, and then I don't know, just made her follow the man in black across the desert, like in Dark Tower, she would not have got a chance to exercise any of that, and it would not have worked very well.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I love having kind of a small roundtable like this is because it's really interesting to listen to the different ways that people approach character work and where the story starts and the process of it all. So I think that's really cool to get kind of the two opposite approaches to the beginning.
And I mean,
one reason I don't give writing advice, because I know that people have successfully put stories on the page using radically different methods, and it would seem silly to me to sort of say, even suggest that it might be better if you did it this way, let alone you should do it this way or this is the only way. Any hint that this is the way to do it seems false to me.
Yeah, and I was gonna say something similar to that, in that everyone knows I'm Mark's #1 fan, and I always talk about his work and how inspired I am by it. But our writing process couldn't be different. Like it's very opposite, as Mark himself said. I'm usually very focused on outlining and planning and building stuff so that I can internalize that and understand it and then sit down and write. Mark is more of a I'm just gonna sit down and write kind of guy, which is the opposite of what I do. So yeah, I totally agree. It's up to you. Whatever works.
Yeah. Well, and I think.
Oh, by the way, this four corner opposition technique. It's from a book by John Truby. I forgot the name, but I'll pull it up.
Awesome.
It's The Anatomy of Story, I think.
Okay. You can, if you want, you can pop it in the chat too, so that
sure,
if people want to go check it out. Mark, I liked what you're talking about earlier about how you kind of got to Yaz and you wanted to write something that was a little bit different than traditionally the protagonist that you'd been working with before. And working on my epic fantasy right now, I also was going to do a short story for an anthology in December. And I took the approach of, I need a creative jostle. I need something that's completely different. I'm starting with a blank page and I'm just going to go and see where it takes me. I'm going to write a completely different character and see what happens. And I think I really appreciate when authors talk about, trying something new or changing things up, because I think it's so important for us as creatives to constantly be kind of shaking things up and experimenting and challenging things and not getting so stuck in a rut of this is the one thing that I do. And even if, they can do it very well. But I think even if you never publish it, trying new things and kind of jumping out into an experiment can be really helpful for the creative process. Do you find that that's true for you?
Well, it's an interesting question because, there's no right or wrong about this stuff. I did an Ask Me Anything on Reddit r/fantasy yesterday or the day before, and a lot of the questions were, are you ever going to return to the Broken Empire? You've only written 6 books in Abeth. When are you going to write some more? And also when I was talking about the varied nature of my output, I was saying that there are some authors who have kept enormously large numbers of people very happy by sticking, like Raymond E. Feist, doing 35 plus books in his world, and Terry Pratchett doing 50 plus books in the Discworld. And there's Terry Pratchett, because the nature of Discworld, it's very varied and imaginative, so there is more variety there. But the Feist ones, it really is, this is I've not read them all, but you get the feeling, my wife's read most of them and got most of them. I get the feeling it is similar in character all the way through, but there is a huge appetite for people who just want to know they can come to Feist and get another Feist book and enjoy more of the same thing they love. And there's just absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say, Raymond, you must go out and write a space comedy now, because if you don't, you're somehow letting the side down, or you're not paying your dues to art. That's fine. The only reason I do what I do, and it's not, I don't feel any sort of virtue in it, is I just get bored, and I don't want to keep on writing the same story and the same characters and the same style. But it's not I don't think it makes me better than anyone else or anything. It's just that I personally get bored doing it. And the idea of going back and, you know, the idea of my latest book being, say, my 16th Jorg book, you know, I would have sort of gone back to science or become I don't know, any random job rather than do that, because I would just start to hate it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of forget the original question, but
I didn't articulate it very well, so I meant more like, but you answered it beautifully. Like, just do you find it helpful to experiment and to push yourself in different directions?
Well, it obviously makes you a more versatile writer. So I do things that I don't know if I can do. Like I always avoided writing about groups of young women because I knew that they had certain particular ways of interacting, especially in the real world, but also in fantasy, that I wasn't sure I could present in a realistic way, and I didn't want to do it badly. But knowing that sort of kind of scared me, I jumped into Red Sister and did exactly that. And it could have gone horribly wrong, but I had trained for it by listening to Mallory Towers with my daughter about 1,000 times in a row. So it is a sort of 1940s story about posh girls being mean to each other in boarding school. And the book I've just written after the library trilogy is a space comedy, and the book I'm attempting to write currently features an old woman as the protagonist, because that's something I've not done. And at the end of it, hopefully I will be able to write any character under the sun. But you know, there's no duty on anyone to become a jack of all trades. They're perfectly at liberty to become the master of writing exactly what they write.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have, I think, very little to add to that. Only that I usually go the path of writing, you know, stuff that I like. It's almost like building D&D characters. Not that you should write your D&D campaigns. That's not what I'm saying. But every time I'm playing D&D, I usually play the character for enough time that, like Mark, I kind of start to get bored with it. So I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to build this other character and go this other completely different direction? Like, okay, I have a barbarian that smashes things, but wouldn't it be cool if I had a wizard that just hangs back? Or, you know, after playing a wizard for so long, it's, oh, I'm so tired of being afraid to get hit. What if I played, you know, a rogue that no one sees or whatever? So yeah, I have like ideas of characters that I think would be really cool to write. I think it's just, you know, thinking up the story for them, and yeah, I totally agree. And the only small thing that I'd add, you know, in my case is, as an author writing my first series, it starts getting a lot harder when you get to the end of that series, because there's so much baggage that you need to remember for the character and how they changed or where they're going. So like, this one's gonna be 4 books. I don't see myself writing, like, you know, 4 more books of these characters, because it starts getting heavy. It starts getting harder to write. So yeah.
I think one thing I forgot to mention was that bouncing around the map like I do serves nobody but my own sort of enjoyment. I.e., it's not a good commercial idea. It would be much better to keep on producing the same thing, because people then know you as the purveyor of that thing, and if they like it, they'll just keep on coming back. Whereas what happens is, if you veer off to the left, you lose some of your audience, and you don't attract a new one because they still think you're doing the thing you were on. And publishers don't like it, because they like to be able to say, well, this person is reliably going to produce this sort of book, and we can market them in this way, and that's the end of the matter. And readers don't like it because there's so many authors out there that if they want a romance, they know who to go to for a romance. And if they want a comedy, they know who to go for that. So they'd rather I kept on writing the thing they know I write and that they enjoyed, than say, oh God, Lawrence has written a comedy. Do I really want to take a risk on that, because he might be terrible at writing comedies? I don't know. So yeah, it's just it's not a good decision on any level other than it makes me happy.
So I feel like that's a pretty valid reason. because I think as the authors, you know, the first person who has to love the story is the person writing it, you know, because that then translates hopefully to the readers after it's finished. So I think there's a lot to be said for the reader enjoying what they're writing.
Well, one of the questions that came up a lot in the Yammer was, you know, because I was on my 16th book, oh, how do you keep up this level of productivity? And I didn't really have a good answer, but now reflecting on it, actually the answer is because I keep writing things that interest me. And we see these famous writers who are stalling on their series. Possibly it's because they've just sort of run out of enjoyment of that thing. And if someone gave them the opportunity to veer into something radically different, they might start writing thousands of words a day again because they were re-enthused, but they're locked into it by the expectations of their legions of fans.
Yep, totally agree.
Stephen has a question for us. I've always wondered, do authors get influenced by other books they read during the writing process?
Yeah.
I mean, yep.
Sorry. Yeah,
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I demand that you go.
Who am I to say no to you, Mark? So, I spent like the first two, while I was writing the first two books of my series, not reading anything. Basically, the only thing I'd read was Mark Lawrence because it was so already, you know, ingrained into my brain that it didn't affect me. It was already a very big influence, but I feel like I've nailed down a couple of things now that I allowed myself to read other stuff, and it hasn't had, you know, bad influence at least. But I usually used to say that, you know, if I read like Joe Abercrombie, I'd start writing like a bad Joe Abercrombie subconsciously. So I just didn't read for like, I don't know, 3 years or whatever the time was, like while I was writing, right in between, after stuff was written, like when I was editing or marketing a book, I let myself read a couple of books here and there. But yeah, I've kind of picked up reading a lot more heavily now, and I think I'm comfortable enough in my craft, I'd say, to do it now. But yeah, you know, when I was writing my first few books, I didn't read anything at all apart from Mark's work. And I'm not saying this to be like, you know, I told Mark this in the Discord as well. So yeah, I think if you have something that's super comfortable and you think won't affect your writing, or already kind of affect your writing, because it's already a big influence, yeah, that was fine for me. But you know, it does affect, to answer your question, to me at least, it does influence a lot.
Well, obviously, I agree that people should read my books, whatever they're doing, driving a truck, whatever, surgery. But yeah, because I've been writing essentially continuously for 12 years now, I obviously have to read while I'm writing, or I wouldn't read at all. It tends to be that I'm more influenced when I'm starting a book, you know, saying, what book shall I write? I'm more influenced by the ones I've enjoyed. It's not that while I'm writing a book, I will change course to somehow echo things in a book that I am reading as I'm writing. But, you know, shortly before, you know, in the year or 2 or 3 before writing, say, the book that wouldn't burn, I had read Piranesi, is that how you say it? With these loads of chambers, very large chambers over a long, and you could get lost in them. And obviously there's echoes of that in the library. And I had read and really liked Strange the Dreamer, which is a 2-perspective story with a romance element to it. It's not a romance, but it has a strong sort of romancy thread through it. Yeah, so there's clear sort of echoes of those things in there. I mean, the main male character in Strange the Dreamer, one of his defining characteristics is his niceness, and I've tried to make Ivar, yeah, when something is as bland and blunt as at a top level as the character is nice, I don't feel it's like copying, but I'm thinking, oh, that's a good idea. Let's have a guy who is just a nice guy. So there's all manner of pieces that have sort of plotted a course for the book as I'm starting to type it. But yeah, when I'm writing the book, I don't really pull in things from things I'm actively reading at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm about halfway through, and I still don't buy that Ibar came out of the mechanism with no abilities. I think it's something like charisma that he just doesn't see. But we'll see when I get to the end.
We'll see.
One question. I wanted to get into SPFBO briefly at the end here, but I do want to talk a little bit about, Mark, you've been writing fantasy, like you said, for 12 years. What are some things that you've seen change, if anything, within fantasy? And, where do you see it going here as we're getting into a lot of new elements of fantasy writing? And what are some of the things that you're kind of seeing coming in the future for fantasy?
I am in no way, shape, or form a fantasy guru. I'm a very slow reader. I manage about 10 books a year. Partly that's just because I am literally a very slow reader. I sort of have mild dyslexia and I don't inhale books like some people do. And partly it's just finding the time to read them. But when you read so little, it doesn't give you an overview of the genre. So my only real insights are coming from being an active participant on forums and seeing what everybody else sees. So in that sense, I'm no better positioned to tell you about the future of fantasy than anybody who regularly visits r/fantasy, for example, or any of the other forums. It's obvious that there have been changes, like Grimdark is far less popular than it used to be, and it was always far less popular than people in the little forum bubbles made it seem. It was always a niche minor thing, and it's even more niche and minor now than it was then. And we've seen the rise of, and again, these are still very niche, like lit RPG. So lots of people were talking about that, and lots of books have sold, but it's not. I don't think it's made any impact whatsoever inside bookshops or on the score sheets of publishers. So I think we. When we're in these forums with all these people who are obsessed with fantasy, we're really sort of out on the end of a lever, and the slightest motion we feel is a great sort of upheaval. But recently we've had this sort of cozy fantasy, and I have no idea what that's about, to be honest. But I think the winner of this year's SPFBO was described as being cozy-ish, at least. So when I read that in the near future, I will get a more of an insight. I do want to try and read is it Legends in Latte, which is supposed to be the sort of flagship for that movement.
Travis Baldry.
Find out if it really is something new or if it's just something we've always had and it's just been repackaged and become very popular. Yeah, but I can't tell you what the future is. Honestly, I have no idea. Fantasy always mirrors to some extent changing social attitudes, and so you ask where society's going and that will tell you where fantasy is going. Sometimes it's at the leading edge of that, sort of embroiling itself in the fights. I don't know, will we get loads more trans people and issues in our fantasy than we do now? Probably. And what's the next fight in that sort of chain? We'll probably have loads of echoes of that filtering into the genre.
So my answer might seem like a non-answer, but I don't think anyone knows what the future is anyway. So I actually think the book market is set up in a way with indie kind of breaking out that makes it that we don't have a single future of fantasy. Because if you look at stuff like, I don't know, movies, for example, superhero movies dominated everything for, 10 years. But now people are getting tired of those. And, space is being open for other things to jump in and maybe take up that mantle. I think for a while we had that, right? The Grimdark movement. Oh, everyone's is reading darker books now, Game of Thrones and Abercrombie and Mark, Prince of Thorns released around that time as well. And then suddenly, the pandemic hit years after, and now people don't really want stuff to be that dark. They're looking for something different, and cozy appeared. So, but if you look at the market, if you look at, like, there's space for everyone, and I think indie being so accessible for readers, like there are more indie books than you can count. Trad as well, but indie just blew that up, right? So it's kind of like, okay, it's whatever you want. The future is whatever you want. So if you want to go this way, you're gonna find good books in trad and in indie, but you don't necessarily. I mean, trad is a slower moving machine than indie, right? So if you didn't have the trad book for that year, for example, then maybe you have to jump on another fad or another, kind of genre that trad was pushing. But now with indie, you can have whatever you like. So it's, to me, I just think the future is kind of like whatever you make of it. It's whatever you want to read, because everything's available.
Mm-hmm. I think John has an excellent point here in the comments too.
Yeah.
I agree with Mike as well.
I'm sure we're going to have more of this sort of non-European settings, but I mean, that's not exactly the future. That's here now, that we've already got a lot of it, and I'm sure we're going to have more of it, because obviously there's acres of space to explore there that we haven't been looking at for, back in the recent past.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you get, like, I just read a book that's in a non-European setting that isn't, like, the third book in the series came out now, which is Gunmetal Gods, which is incredible, and
Emil Zakhtar or something like that.
Yeah, Zamil Akhtar. It was a SPFBO competitor, I think, at one point.
A nice cover, I seem to remember.
Yeah. And that one really clicked with me. So can we, like, clump all those books and say that's the future? Sure, but it's whatever you want to read now, in my opinion, because I think for books, like, different than other mediums, the indie market is more developed, and it's not better or worse than trad. It's just faster to put things out, which sometimes, quality gets a hit. But if you want to look for different stuff, because you have that option of going indie, I think you can just, make the future whatever you want to be, basically. And I think the publishers are noticing that as well. Starting stuff like Orbit Works, which is basically an indie online publishing house. They do what indie authors do, but under the Orbit brand, and Tor is doing that as well. A few others are doing that. So yeah, I think
that book's just been picked up by a traditional publisher.
Yeah,
it might be Head of Zeus or someone, but
yeah. I think it's Head of Zeus. Yeah, I think it actually had a traditional publisher in India, but then there was some kind of issue, and then he went to Head of Zeus. So yeah, I mean, I think the future is wide open, to be honest, because we have all the options here, and it doesn't have to be a single thing.
Mm-hmm. Katie was bringing up in the comments SPFBO, and that was something that I had on my list that I wanted to talk about a little bit. And this was almost my exact question. Mark, what drew you to creating SPFBO in the first place? Because we're on year 9 of it, starting in literally 4 days here.
Yeah.
And for anybody in the comments who has no idea what I just said, SPFBO is the self-published fantasy blog off, which is a competition for indie authors. And you start with 300 and end up with 10 finalists, and then one winner at the end of the year. So, Mark, where did that start? How did that? Yes, and Thiago, finalist for SPFBO 8.
The finalists get this super cool coin.
Very cool. I've been seeing that all over Twitter this last couple of days, which is super cool.
That I can't stop looking at ever.
They're quite fun. I've got one of them myself. It's the blank that has no writing around the edge. It's the one that they send you to say, "Is this okay?" Mm-hmm. And there's just nice heft to them. They're just nice thing to hold.
Nice.
Yeah, there's self-published fantasy blog off written there on the side.
Anyway, I definitely need a good origin story for it, because the real answer doesn't reflect particularly well on me, and it would be nice if it was sort of something that painted me as in some sort of heroic role. The answer is really just a restless imagination, and I was bored, and it seemed like it would be a fun thing to do. The slightly better sounding version, which is also true, you can have multiple true things, is it's also born of survivor guilt that I came through writing groups. Like I was saying, I put Prince of Thorns onto a writing group chapter by chapter, and so I was always seeing people who were also writing, people who were writing really well, and I knew that the vast majority of them, just statistically speaking, weren't going to get anywhere. And I worked briefly as a sort of, volunteered as a slush reader for a magazine some friends of mine were running. So lots of short stories would come in, and I mean lots, and lots of them were really good, but they could only publish sort of a handful. And you were going to get paid $10 if your story came in, and the amount of work to write a story like that, the hours and the hours to then be in competition with scores of other people for $10, it's just ridiculous. And so when I had, with very little effort, secured this book deal, and a sizable amount of money, and I was still seeing all the people I knew back then, and also all of the self-published people who were just really starting to bubble up in numbers. It just felt like I had lucked out, and I didn't feel like it was for any particular merit. And so it just felt like a nice idea to have another net that would catch potentially some of the great books out there that would never come to anybody's attention, because there were so many self-published books out there, and people were so wary of them because they had no way of choosing a good one from a bad one, that the contest could say, well, look, here are some ones that a lot of bloggers that you trust have read, and they've said these are the best of the bunch, and so that would give you confidence to go and try them. Maybe something would happen for those authors and those people, and I think it's worked well. It's obviously it's a net, and people fall through it, and obviously even if you win it, you're not guaranteed to be wildly successful. You'll just get a few more people reading your book, but I feel we have discovered books that only a handful of people had read, that turned out to be things that thousands of people would love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Thiago, as somebody who was in it this last year, how do you feel like, as a new indie author, how did that impact, your early career with A Touch of Light?
It's indescribable. It really is everything that Mark described in helping authors, because I mean, I can see the spikes. I have the history, like the sales history and the interest of, followers and all that. And the day I was announced as a finalist, it all spiked, and it kept that level like until today. So it really is a huge boost to your career, because that's like the number one issue with indie, is because there are no gatekeepers. You don't know what's good and what's bad, right? I'm not saying that if a book doesn't get to the finals, it's bad. There are some amazing books that are cut sometimes even in phase one that are just great. But
Senlin Ascends.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think there are a ton of authors who've done very well for themselves, just using the single review they get in the competition. It just shows that the author is willing to really put themselves out there and say, hey, look, I'm gonna throw in with these 299 other books, and I think my book is good enough to have a place at the table, and a lot of people just respect that and see that as the author is someone who put the work in. So give them a shot, give their books a try, and that alone is already huge for the competition, right? So even if you're not a finalist, even if you're not a semi-finalist, just the people who enter the competition are already looked at. The readers are looking at those books already. So yeah, it to me, it's the single like best thing that you can do for your book is entering SPFBO, especially if you're a debut author. And yeah, I just got very, very fortunate that my book clicked with the blog that I was in, and I got picked as a finalist, because there are some amazing books. There were some amazing books in my year, and some amazing authors. I still remember the fear I had of Rob Rob J. Hayes. But I thought he was going to kick me out of the competition, right? But because his book was in the Sentinel, so any blog could pick it as a finalist. So yeah, and I mean, it's incredible. It's an incredible experience. Whether you're a finalist or not, it's just super cool to put yourself out there, and you can always write a new book. So I just say, every time you have a book that's eligible, just go for it, because it's a very, very cool competition. It's a great experience. You're gonna make a lot of friends. I made a ton of friends that were like in the trenches with me. Yeah. I agree, Patrick. It's I mean, I read I took some time to read his books because I had to get over the trauma, but I read Along the Razor's Edge, and it's phenomenal. He's a spectacular writer. I did not read it during the competition because that would only make me more scared, because I'd feel like such a noob. But yeah, I mean, it's really, really just, it's a really cool experience. It's a really cool competition, and I'm just thankful forever for Mark for having created it. And it's
worth remembering, though, that it is still a lottery, that you could have your book land, because some of the blogs are just a single person, so you obviously then you're going to depend upon the opinion of a single person. Some of them have teams, but sometimes they just divide the books up among, so each person will make the call on each book, but some of them have teams where all the team read all the books, and then you've got more of an average going on. But yeah, it's a lottery, and if your book just lands with somebody who wasn't particularly impressed by that sort of book, maybe 9 out of 10 of them would have passed it, but you got the 10th one, and that's just the way the world works. And the other thing I wanted to say was that everyone who's writing should be aware that writing a brilliant book is not a guarantee of success in any way, shape, or form. That to do really well, you have to write a good book, but writing a good book doesn't mean you're going to do really well. That as a self-published author, you're shouting into the void with a tiny squeak, and even if individuals here and there read your book, and every individual who reads it goes, "My God, this is the best book ever," unless a whole bunch of them manage to collect in one place and shout at the same time, they're never going to draw enough people in, and it won't snowball. And so you need to get over that. In science, we call it the noise floor. You have to get a sufficient signal boost to poke up above the noise floor and have people take a chance on you, because otherwise they'll just never know. And that was the deal with Senlin in a sense, that he had Josiah Bancroft had sort of knocked himself out trying to promote this, and he'd done far more work trying to promote it than most authors would. And doing that sort of thing is incredibly disheartening. I watch people I know who have self-published, and they're making all this effort, and they spending this money to advertise or whatever, or send books great distances to people, and it still doesn't move the needle. And even when they get a great review of someone, it still doesn't. You have to have this simultaneous excitement and buzz. And that's just the mechanics of the book business, which is why publishers have their merit, because the thing they do for you is put you up there. And after that, if you fail or fly, you can't say it was because no one ever knew. I mean, even with publishers, if you're sort of not at the top of their sort of interest list, then they don't push you very high up the mast, and you can still be overlooked. But that's what every author wants, is the chance to have enough people read their book and to get the genuine judgment of the public. And if it doesn't take a particularly large sample, you know, if you get 1,000 people read your book, if it's a good enough book, they'll go out and they'll pull more people in. But if you just get 10 people, that's not enough. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the places where the kind of merging of a competition like SPFBO and the community around it is so important, because it gets people's books out in front of a larger fantasy community that, whether they make semifinals or even a book that, you know, might be cut right away, creates enough buzz that people go out and read it and they're, oh my gosh, but this is so good. And then they start telling people about it and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a, you know, there's kind of two forces working together, I think, which is fun. And I mean, most people I talk to, the community gets brought up over and over and over again of, you know, how much of the fantasy community is trying to like push each other forward, and you know, that it's competitive, but it's not cutthroat to some degree, at least in the community that we've been a part of for the most part, which is really wonderful.
There's two strands to it, and it's the power in the SPFBO is those two strands working together. That you've got the bloggers, and they have obviously a sizable profile. So if the 10 blogs say this is a brilliant book, that's going to draw some attention. But if that's all it was, then even 10 blogs, it's a relatively quiet voice in the grand scheme of things. But it's all of the people who take part that really are the engine of the publicity. That it's all of the contestants themselves, and the past contestants, and the people who just watch it and sort of follow it and do sort of echo it. You know, there's this year one of our new bloggers is a lady who last year was just essentially said, I'm going to be my own private, I'm going to do exactly what a judge does and make scores and charts and talk about it with my YouTube friends outside. And this year we had a slot, and so I asked her to come and join us. And we really need all of the self-published authors in the community to boost that signal, because then the profile will be there when they want to make use of it themselves.
Yeah, I was gonna mention Cassidy, to be honest, just as an example of how SPFBO can snowball you to other stuff, right? Because I think she actually picked up my book because she saw it on SPFBO as a semi-finalist, and she really loved it. And then she decided to kind of do the shadow finalist read along. And to your point as well of it being a lottery, the results on her read and her
You were her
story.
top pick. You were her champion.
Yeah, I won that one, so I can say I'm a shadow champion, shadow champion. But yeah, I mean, it's super different depending on who's reading it, right? So it's super subjective. And again, you know, I loved books that were cut in phase 1 of SPFBO. So yeah, to your point of it being a lottery, absolutely agree. But just the fact of being an SPFBO, you know, participant gets your book out there, and because Cassidy picked it up, a lot of her friends started picking it up, and because she loved the book and talked a lot about it. You know, a whole like different like block of people who I didn't know just started reading my book, and it starts snowballing from there, right? And then a lot of different people are talking about it suddenly, and SPFBO was kind of like the start of that to me, because I don't think they'd have picked it up or even known about the book if it weren't for SPFBO. So yeah, it's really great regardless of how well you do in the competition.
Yeah, Mike, Indies rising tides raise all ships. It's been very true from the community so far that I've been a observer for the most part. So I'm very grateful as somebody who's kind of just finding that community, that it's raised my confidence level as a writer to know that I'm coming into a community that has these opportunities and that everybody's been, you know, lifting each other up, and it's a good place to come into also. So my last question for you guys is, what's next for both of you? So Mark, you've just published the book That Wouldn't Burn, which everyone should go check out. I'm very excited to get to it. What's next? Because I know you're probably 4 books ahead of us at this point. So what's next for you?
Well, I mean, I've written the trilogy, so that will be coming out next year and the year after. As I say, I wrote that space comedy that gave me a great deal of enjoyment writing, and my agent is out there seeing if he can sell it. I don't know if he'll be able to or not, because it's, like I say, a completely different new thing. I will attempt to snag another 3-book deal from my publishers. That's just my standard model that has worked so far. I don't know if it will continue to work, where I write like 4 or 5 chapters of something and say, I could write this. Would you like to buy it off me? And they say yes. Whether they'll say yes this year, I have no idea. But that would be a nice place to be in, to have another 3 years sort of locked in. And so that's the thing I was talking about. The book with an old female protagonist. I was writing something that's based on the maiden mother hag trilogy that appears in a whole bunch of different mythologies, and I didn't want to go the maiden mother hag progression, because that would start with a young protagonist, and what would be different with that. So I wanted to start with the older incarnation and see if I could make an old female character someone that fantasy fans wanted to read about, because people always say in forums, oh, we don't get enough old female, but do they really mean it? Do they really mean it, or are they just saying it because it sounds like the sort of thing they should say? Oh, well, I'm calling their bluff. I'm going to write one and see if they come and read about her.
Sign me up. I'm excited.
Yeah. I'm just trying to finish book 3.
How far into it are you?
Around 50,000 words.
Okay.
But this one is like the big one. It's the one that really shifts a few character arcs around and has some very big revelations and some stuff that I really need to do right. So I'm letting myself take my time with it. I still think I'll be done with like the first draft sometime around next month. Because it took me some time to kind of get into the rhythm, but now I'm pretty into rhythm. So yeah, I'm chugging along. This one is probably going to be around 200,000 words. So it's probably going to be a little longer than the other ones, like, because I'm finishing the first POV and it's around 50,000 words, and they tend to be like more or less the same. So I think it's going to end up around 180.
You're on 50,000 and you're aiming for 200,000, and you're going to have a draft ready next month. Sounds,
yeah, probably.
like an extraordinary amount of writing in the next few weeks.
Yeah, because once I get into it, I really get into like 3,000-4,000 words a day at least. So
okay,
yeah,
impressive.
I'm gonna try and push it. Yeah, we'll see. But I certainly am gonna have at least half of it done, which I can already then send my editor, and then he'll start editing while I write the other half. So then, you know, I kind of get things moving that way.
Cool.
Yeah.
Derry's ready for the Hagtail. Well, you know you've sold at least 3 copies, Mark, right there. So you gotta start somewhere. Yeah, it is funny though, because I hear that all the time, that people are like, we want more moms, we want more like older female protagonists and stuff. And I mean, I agree with that, but it'll be interesting to see, like anything else, how it lands in the community and how it takes off. So I'm excited for that.
And you have to if you do something like that, you have to lean into it. You can't just say, look, here's a superhero and she's old. You know, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a label. Then you have to have an old character with all of the things that that entails, which are pros and cons. But yeah, I mean, it's like people ask for disabled characters, but again, you have to realistically portray them. You can't just say, oh, this person has got, I don't know, no arms and legs, but they've got telepathy, which means they can pick stuff up easily and move themselves around. It's, if you wholly compensate for a disability, then you just put a label on them, said they're disabled, but you're not really portraying a disabled person. And the same sort of thing I feel you have to do with whatever new, not new, but whatever new for you thing you try.
Well, and briefly, you mentioned, Mark, you know, as somebody who's not quite as far over on the planner side of things, when you're writing a trilogy, this is something that I'm going to be looking at, and I'm very interested to hear your answer on it. How do you, when you have that many threads coming through a series and you've set up all these different things through book 1, book 2, how do you make sure that everything is all there at the end?
I have no idea. I just have, at this point, I have faith that it will all come together, but I genuinely have no idea when I finished book 1, let's say, of the library trilogy, what was going to happen in books 2 or 3. None at all. And the same for when I finished book 2, I just didn't really know what was going to happen in book 3 at all. But you know, you've got a year or 9 months to work it out, and you're going to be poking it around every day and just push forwards. And I found that you can just generally reach out and pull everything together.
Yeah, as a discovery writer, that is incredibly encouraging. So thank you. What are you going to say, Thiago?
The process is basically the same. It's just if you're doing the work up front or after you're done with the first draft. So you can always go back and change stuff if you think, you know, the lines aren't fitting or ending where you want them to. So I think it's just, I think people put too much stock in planner versus pantser, but it's just, you know, whether you work the plan before you start writing or afterwards.
Well, I want to say thank you to both of you guys for sharing your time and your thoughts on the channel today. I really appreciate both of you taking time out of your busy schedules of writing to be here and to hang out.
Absolutely.
So, and for everyone in the,
I just wanted an excuse to leave the kids with my wife for a bit. So.
Have some quiet time. Yeah.
Oh, obviously, I'm super happy to be here. I think it's the first time I talked to Mark in person. He knows how big of a fan I am. So, yeah, I'm just super happy to have done this. So thank you, Tori.
We kind of joked on my last imposter syndrome episode that because I had a couple authors that had never met and we're talking prior to the show going on. And I was joking that my slogan on my channel should be bringing authors together because there's a lot of people that have been meeting on my channel recently. So I'm happy to facilitate.
This was our first date, Thiago.
Exactly.
I'm kind of the third wheel on the side over here.
I tried to kick you out, but you came back.
You did. Well, my internet company needs to be fired is what needs to happen. That's the second time that's happened. So, but we're professional, so we just roll with it, right? Awesome. Well, thank you guys again so much for being here. Thank you, Mark, especially for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you to everybody in the comments for hanging out with us. And if you're here watching the replay, thank you for watching after. And we will see you guys in the next video.